Now, also, there is a audience that's divided in trying to understand, John, what's happening in Iran and the United States. There is a section of people who believe that the Americans are kowtowing in some way and not really able to intimidate Iran. On the other hand, there is a group that feels that Iran is economically decimated. It's just their ego that's not letting them negotiate and bring the Americans to the table. What exactly is happening, if you can lend some perspective for the people, especially in India, who are confused about what's happening?
Yeah, it's interesting in what the news follows and what's the main talking point. Of course, what was done during the 38 days, it's funny how people are like, yeah, that doesn't matter. Like how much damage was actually done to Iran during those 38 days, how many leaders were lost, how many actual military capabilities.
People forget that.
Yeah, for billions. I think the numbers are in the trillions, actually, of the costs. Now they believe they can make that up, right? They're very strong. All the leaders, new leaders come in. There is an element of that. Where we're at right now, though, whether it's a nuclear program or the Strait of Hormuz, for the United States, who really knows what the decisions are now? I try not to get surprised, but sometimes I get surprised on how many people have already ruled the war to conclusion, that Iran's already won. It now has a massive capability, superpower. Actually, New York Times wrote they're becoming a superpower because they have the control over the Strait of Hormuz. As we're talking, the U.S. says that they're getting as much oil out as before the war. So like 20 million barrels last Sunday. And Iran is still fully blockaded. It loses about $400 million a day. And then people forget about what was happening in January of 2026 is that the reason that protesters were protesting in Iran wasn't because of any Israel-American issues.
It's the economy.
The economy had failed.
Right.
The banks had failed. Now, that problem hasn't gone away. I mean, inflation is like 200%. What will happen eventually? For the U.S., there are a lot of concerns, of course, that people, again, discount because whether they're anti-Israel, they just want the war to stop, which I'm fine if you're anti-war. I'm not fine if people are anti-fact on what's actually going on. Of course, the United States has a lot of domestic constraints or concerns as well. The price of the gas pump, the midterm elections, I think, personally, I believe, just my opinion, that's the number one consideration at the moment. So I don't think
Donald Trump's ratings are pretty low at this point.
Again, he's not running for re-election. It's the party. It's the House and the Senate in control in order to fulfill the Donald Trump's rest of his administration's agenda, which has big goals. The war, I think, will stay in a steady state of this blockade. Stuff still getting out, rhetoric on both sides until after the midterm elections, and then we'll see. I personally don't believe that the Strait of Hormuz will have an end state that would upset all the global freedom of navigations. Because if you were to allow for a different situation in the Strait of Hormuz, then you have the Strait of Malacca, you have the Suez Canal, the Bab el-Mandeb. Every global thoroughfare would be changed, and I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the United States is going to let that happen, or even the allies, but this war has definitely exposed a lot of weaknesses, whether that's the U.S. magazine depth, the strength of all the Gulf states' ability to defeat air defense. So much has been discovered in this short amount of time. There is war weariness because of what we call forever wars, and I don't like shorthand. But this war is not over in any way, shape, or form. And even when it ends, I'm not sure the regime is going to be in such good shape afterwards because of the economic situation. Not just the damage, but this won't solve their squandering of their infrastructure. And of course, as I travel around India, that's all I see, right, is infrastructure projects. And I was in, whether it's in Jammu or Srinagar, infrastructure matters for a country's strength. This won't solve in Iran's infrastructure problem. They were about to move the capital of Iran, Jeanette, before this war because they couldn't bring drinking water to the capital. This war doesn't solve that problem. It doesn't make them rich in any sense of the nature. I actually believe no matter what, Iran comes out of this weaker because the Strait of Hormuz becomes less relevant. There's all kinds of alternatives already being built, discussed, or already in action.
Do you think that there's some, takeaways from this war as to, what countries can do when they're pushed to the wall? For instance, Iran using the Strait of Hormuz to blackmail the world. Iran attacking US allies to send a message to the Americans. Do you think there's been this metamorphosis in the last few months because of this war? And perhaps in the future as well, it's going to be strategic economic handicaps that countries are going to gun for, just the way India has suspended the Indus Water Treaty with Pakistan.
Yep, absolutely. And this is, again, why I think our book on Operation Sindoor is so important is what is the lesson? Not the lesson that everybody else talks about, but what are the lessons on that Pakistan took from it, like their weaknesses, and are they going to address those rapidly? Are they going to create a rocket force, a drone force? What did China learn from it? So for the Iran war, there's so much that has been learned. Not that we didn't know the Strait of Hormuz was going to be played. Of course, that's the big question. Did the U.S. were they advised, and they thought it would be a less risk in priority of the other risk? Because the missile threat, we all talk about drones, and I deal with this a lot around the world. Drones are important. If you don't have drones, or if you don't have counter drones, you'd be found wanting, right? And I don't think Pakistan during Operation Sindoor had the right type of drones, even though they threw hundreds of drones at India. India had counter UAS that will now be better because of the fact, but they learned something as well. So the missile threat that Iran built, I think, will be one of the lessons. Is not just Iran had a certain quantity of missiles that it initially tried to attack Israel, and it did attack U.S. bases in the region, but how, if you don't have that integrated layered air defense system, there's a lot of defense industry that's going to make a lot of money, as so many countries will have to have learned that lesson, that you have to invest in that as part of your actual defense. And a lot of countries were relying on other countries to come to their aid and not having that internal defense. The Strait of Hormuz, again, the Battle of Hormuz is still being fought, so I can't give you the lesson of it. Of course, not prioritizing it was likely going to be shown as a mistake because of what it did to the global economy, and those picking up whether it's Saudi Arabia or whomever, calling the United States, going, look, I know you're pursuing your goals here, but we need you to stop because we're vulnerable. Like hitting the desalination plants of the Gulf states, which isn't a military target.
It's a low blow.
It's a low blow, but the vulnerability was exposed, and of course the United States is dealing with a lot of people's interests, to include humanitarian crisis for Iran. Because right now what the United States is allowing into Iran is food. So we're blockading, but of course in war you have to factor in the humanitarian concern as well. And that's a big factor of the lessons. So there's so many lessons, and why I have a lot of job security is because even after the war ends, some people will take the wrong lessons. So if we were to do a book on Iran, again, I want to see how it actually ends